My beloved child, you are standing in a place you yourself have called the end. You look back and see only doors that have closed, things that cannot be salvaged, unfinished promises, and dreams you wrapped up with exhaustion. You call it an ending because you have reached the limit of your strength, the point where your mind can no longer draw the next path forward. But I call this place by another name. I call it a covenant point, not a place where everything ends, but a place where you and I meet in a way deeper than you have ever known. You have grown used to thinking that a covenant is formed only when you are strong, when you obey fully, when you are good enough to stand before me without lowering your head. But, my child, true covenants are often born in moments when you have nothing left to hold on to except trust, when you no longer have words to pray, when familiar phrases fall from your lips and only a quiet sigh remains. I am there. When you think you have gone wrong for too long, missed too much, fallen so far behind others that there is no way back, I am still there. I do not wait for you to be perfect to meet you. I wait for you to be real. You do not realize that the very place where you think you have lost everything is where I am laying the foundation for what I want to give you. What you call collapse, I call dismantling. What you call breaking apart, I call opening. For there are things I cannot build upon unless I first reach the old foundation. There are seasons I cannot lead you into while you are still carrying false definitions of your own worth. I do not tear down to destroy. I dismantle to release. And the covenant point is always just beyond the moment you think you cannot endure any longer. I know you have asked me many questions in silence. Not the grand questions meant to display faith, but the small, very real ones. Can I keep going? What if I stop? What if this is truly the end? You have not dared to say them aloud, because you are afraid you might not survive the answer yourself. But I have heard them. I do not hear only your words. I hear the rhythm of your heart when you try to appear fine, and the trembling you hide behind days when you keep moving as if nothing has happened. My child, I did not lead you here to abandon you. I led you here because this is the point where I want to lay my hand on your life once again, not to fix the surface, but to re-establish the covenant in depth. There are covenants not written in success, but in surrender. There are covenants not sealed with shouts of joy, but with tears falling in silence. And those covenants are stronger than you imagine, because they do not rest on your strength, but on my faithfulness. You once thought that if I were truly with you, things would never have gone this far. But you have not seen the whole picture. You have not seen the times I held you back when you were about to step into something that would have broken you completely. You have not seen the doors I closed so you would not wander farther from yourself. You have not seen the moments I slowed your pace not to punish you, but so you could still recognize my voice among the many others pulling you along. The covenant point is not loud. It does not come with thunder. It comes when you are tired enough to stop pretending. I do not blame you for thinking this is the end. You are simply looking through eyes that have been forced to strive for too long. But I invite you to look again with trust. Look back, not to regret, but to recognize that even in the stretches you call failure, I was still there. Even in the decisions you regret, I was still using them to teach you discernment. Even in relationships that fell apart, I was still protecting you from losing yourself completely. You have not slipped from my hand. You are being led closer to where I truly want to meet you. Listen to me say this slowly. I do not come to the covenant point to take more from you. I come to give back the identity that grew dim after living too long to meet expectations, to give back the peace you traded away to keep pace with the world, to give back the ability to trust without needing to see immediately. The covenant point does not require you to prove anything. It only asks you to stay long enough for me to do what you cannot do for yourself. I know you like things to be clear, to have a sign that tells you where you are and what to do next. But the covenant point rarely comes with a map. It comes like a quiet but powerful current, like an inner redirection before the outer world has time to change. You imagine endings always look like a door slamming shut, a final answer, something that leaves you with no choice. But I tell you this often, an ending is simply the name you give to the moment I stop you. So you no longer run on instinct, no longer live by reflex, no longer trade your soul for the illusion of control. You have grown used to defining life by movement, by still advancing, still doing, still achieving, still keeping pace in the eyes of others. So when I slow you down, you panic. When I allow a door not to open as you planned, you begin to wonder whether I am still there. But I am there, my child, and I am there in a way deeper than anything you have measured by signs. You are used to recognizing my presence through smooth circumstances, but I want you to recognize my presence through the steadiness of your soul. There are seasons when nothing flows easily, not because I am absent, but because I am touching the foundation so you stop building your life on what cannot withstand strong winds. You do not realize that there is a kind of loss not meant to take away, but to make room. When you keep everything as it is, there is no space to receive what is new. When you cling to an old definition of success, your hands are not free to receive a new definition of life. And when you keep pulling the future toward you by your own strength, you lose the ability to hear my voice guiding you step by step in the present. I do not want you to live in fear of being late. I want you to live in union with me, because only there will time no longer bend you out of shape. There are things in you that have become habits you call personality, but in truth they are wounds. You call never-resting discipline, but I see anxiety wrapped in something respectable. You call always being strong maturity, but I see fear of abandonment. You call carrying everything yourself responsibility, but I see a false covenant you made with yourself that if you do not hold it all together, everything will collapse. And my child, that false covenant is what has made you weary, cold, and depleted, so depleted that you no longer remember how long it has been since you last took a deep breath. I did not bring you to the covenant point to frighten you. I brought you here to free you from old covenants you no longer remember agreeing to. There were silent vows you spoke in pain. I will no longer need anyone. I will stop expecting. I will do it myself to be safe. I will never allow myself to be weak again. You thought those vows were how you survived, and for a time, they truly helped you get through. But what helps you survive is not always what helps you live. You may have made it through the storm, but you are still wearing the storm's wet clothes, and you have come to call that cold normal. The covenant point, my child, is the place where I ask your permission to remove that wet garment from you, not to leave you exposed, but so that you may be warmed again by true love. I do not force you to let go in a single day. I ask you only one very small question, so small that, if you are not attentive, you might pass over it like so many other things. Will you give me permission to enter the place you have locked away, the place you hide because you fear that if it is opened, you will collapse? I do not come there to tear it open. I come to stand with you, so that you no longer have to be alone inside your own fear. You think an ending happens when something leaves you, but I tell you, sometimes a true ending is when something leaves your hands, when you no longer have to hold an image, No longer have to keep pace. No longer have to preserve your sense of being enough. And you will be surprised when you stop holding on. You do not fall because I am holding you. I do not hold you by making everything easy at once, but by freeing you from the need to strain just to survive. I hold you by giving you a kind of peace that does not depend on how much you have accomplished today. Let me be clear, so you do not misunderstand me. I do not despise what you desire. I am not opposed to the dreams you carry. I am not calling you to live small, but I love you enough not to give you something great while you are still bent under fear. I love you enough not to open a new season while you are still entering it with old mechanisms. For if I were to move you forward quickly while you are still trying to prove yourself, you would turn blessing into burden, opportunity into chains, and a new season into yet another cycle of exhaustion. I do not want you merely to achieve. I want you to receive life, to receive breath, to receive freedom in me. Do you remember when you once prayed something very real? Without embellishment or eloquence, I just want peace. You said it on a night you could no longer endure. On a morning when you looked into the mirror and did not recognize yourself. In a moment when everything kept moving while your heart felt empty. You spoke as though no one were listening, but I heard. And I began answering in a way you did not expect. I led you to the covenant point, where peace is no longer the reward for everything going well, but the foundation of your belonging to me. So if today you find yourself standing in an in-between space, where what was old no longer sustains you, and what is new has not yet appeared, do not rush to call it emptiness. This is the space where I am clearing away the noise, so you can hear what is true. This is the space where I am drawing you out of false motivations, so you may walk with a new one. This is the space where I am teaching you to live by trust rather than control. And my child, I do not leave you there to wander endlessly. I keep you there just long enough for the covenant to become real within you, not merely an idea, not merely words you speak to calm yourself, but a foundation you can stand on, even when the wind has not yet changed direction. From this covenant point, you will no longer walk as you did before. You will walk not to prove yourself, but to respond. You will act not in order to be loved, but because you already are. You will stop not because you have given up, but because you know I am leading. And when you step forward again, you will realize that what you thought was an ending has become a new promise, quietly, opening, steady, and sure. Like dawn arriving without asking permission from the night. Do you remember Abraham? Not when he was strong, certain, and secure, but when I told him to leave his country, his father's house, and go to a land I would show him later. He did not know the destination, had no map, no guarantee beyond my word. If he had looked with reason alone, it would have appeared to be an ending, the end of stability, the end of familiar identity, the end of belonging. Yet that very moment was the covenant point. I will make you into a great nation was not spoken when he had everything, but when he stood between loss and obedience. So it is with you. What you think is the final punctuation is often the place where I begin opening a story far longer than you imagine. I know your life does not resemble the ancient pages of Scripture, but the rhythm of the soul has not changed. You go to work each day. You pay bills. You care for family. You face emails that receive no reply, phone calls that never come, plans that remain suspended. There are evenings when you sit very still, not because you are at peace, but because you are spent. You no longer cry because you have cried enough. You no longer complain because you fear appearing weak. And you call that state acceptance. But I see more clearly you have reached the limits of self-reliance. And at that very point, like Elijah exhausted beneath the broom tree, I do not rebuke you for wanting to stop. I give you rest. I give you food. I let you sleep. Only then do I speak again of the journey. For before there is new direction, the soul must be nourished. The covenant point does not require you to immediately understand the meaning of everything that is happening. Even Joseph did not understand why the coat of many colors led him into a pit, why dreams given by me began with betrayal, imprisonment, and neglect, seen in fragments. It looks like a series of endings, but seen through my eyes, it is a precise curve, where every loss moved him closer to the place I had prepared. You do not need to become Joseph. You only need to recognize that I also waste nothing in your life, not even the moments you are most ashamed of. I bring these examples into the flow not so that you compare yourself to them, but so you grasp one very practical truth. I often work most deeply when the surface of your life appears most tangled. When you lose a job, lose direction, lose a relationship, or lose the image you thought you had to protect, I am not standing aside as an observer. I am present in every small detail. In the morning, you do not want to leave your bed. In the meal, you eat without appetite. In the question you are afraid to ask anyone, if I have done my best and still ended up here, does any of it matter? I do not answer that question with a slogan. I answer it with faithful presence, day by day, choice by choice. Every time you still rise to do what is right, even when no one sees. Have you noticed that Jesus did not call his disciples at the peak of their success? He called them in the midst of ordinary life, Peter mending his nets, Matthew sitting at the tax booth. They were not in moments of glory, but in very normal, even stalled days. And the call did not begin with, "Be successful," but with "Follow me." To follow is not to know the entire road, but to walk close enough to me that you do not lose your way. Your covenant point is the same. It is not loud. It is woven into your daily life, where I invite you to change how you walk, not immediately change your circumstances. I do not want you to read these words and then search for a dramatic event to confirm them. The covenant point is usually confirmed by very small yet very real changes. You begin to speak more honestly with me in prayer, no longer polishing your words. You begin to rest when rest is needed without condemning yourself. You begin to discern what is driven by fear and what is guided by my spirit. These things do not draw attention, but they are signs that a new foundation is being laid. And I say this so your heart may be at ease. The covenant is not broken because you are still weak. It is not annulled because you still doubt. Peter denied me, yet the covenant did not end. I met him again by the shore, in a very ordinary setting, charcoal fire, grilled fish, a quiet morning. There was no thunder, no rebuke, only a question that touched the center. Do you love me? I did not ask whether he was strong enough yet, or ready to lead. I asked about relationship because that has always been the heart of the covenant. My child, if today you are still going to work, still caring for others, still trying to keep your heart from hardening even though you are tired, even though you cannot yet see a way out, this is not a sign that you have failed. It is a sign that you are still in a process. And if you dare to remain with me in that process, not escaping through busyness, not numbing yourself with false hope, you will begin to see this. The place you thought was an ending has quietly become the place where I am rewriting the rhythm of your life. Not faster, not slower, but in a way that fits your soul. I do not need you to understand everything right now. I only ask that you keep walking with me through small stretches, through real days. For covenant is not kept by complete understanding, but by faithfulness in the next steps. And I am here not at the end of the road, but right beside you, within the very current you are walking through, so that you do not have to cross the place you once called an ending alone. And when you remain long enough at this point of covenant, you will begin to notice something unexpected. It is not the circumstances that change first, but the way you stand within them. What once sent you into panic no longer has the power to drive you into flight. The silences that once frightened you become places where you can breathe. You no longer need to fill every moment with motion to prove that you are still living correctly. You begin to slow down without guilt, not because you have given up, but because you are no longer driven by the fear of being left behind. I am doing something very quiet, yet very real. I am shifting the center of your life from what must I do next to where am I with me in this step. You will see this work seep into very small things. The way you wake in the morning is no longer accompanied by an invisible weight pressing on your chest. The way you enter a conversation no longer carries the need to prove that you are fine. The way you work is no longer about preserving an image, but about preserving integrity. These changes do not draw applause, but they are signs of a new foundation that can bear the weight of long days. Like the house I spoke of, not built on the sand of rising and falling emotions, but on the rock of hearing and doing. The rain may still come, the wind may still blow, but you no longer collapse simply because things do not go as planned. There will be times when you ask yourself if this truly is a point of covenant. Why do I still face hard things? Why do answers not come immediately? Why do I not make everything clearer for you, my child? Covenant does not remove trial. It changes the way you pass through trial. The people of Israel were not brought straight into the promised land after leaving Egypt. They went through the wilderness not because I lacked power, but because the wilderness was where I separated them from a slave mindset before giving them freedom. If I had brought them in immediately, they would have carried Egypt into the promised land. I do not want you to carry old chains into a new season. Your wilderness may not look like the ancient pages of Scripture. It may be a season at work where nothing advances, a relationship that forces you to face yourself, a slowing you did not choose. Yet even there, I am teaching you something very specific, manna for today, not storing up for tomorrow through anxiety, not living off old memories, living from the sufficiency of today. You have grown so used to looking ahead that you have forgotten that I am the God of the present, and I always meet you here, not in yesterday's regret, and not in tomorrow's fear. There will be moments when you feel as though you are walking without results, sowing without harvest. You will be tempted to return to old ways, old rhythms, old compromises that once helped you move faster. Remember David? He was anointed very early, but the throne came very late. Between those two moments were years of hiding, damp caves, and opportunities to take power by shortcuts he refused. Not because he was weak, but because he knew this: what comes by your own hand can be lost by your own hand. What comes by my hand will stand. I am teaching you the same lesson, not to slow you down, but so that you do not break when you stand high. You will also learn to discern my voice more clearly among many others. The voice of pressure tightens you. My voice settles you. Even when the road ahead is not easy, pressure tells you to act now so you will not be late. My voice asks you to remain long enough so you will not be wrong. You will no longer call every opportunity mine. You will no longer chase every open door. You will begin to ask, will this door keep my soul whole? And I rejoice when you ask that question. because it means you are no longer selling peace in exchange for speed. In very ordinary days, when nothing dramatic seems to happen, I am still at work. I am rearranging what is inside you, how you see yourself, how you respond when you are not recognized, how you face being misunderstood. These shape you more than any external milestone ever could. Paul learned this in prison, when he wrote that he had learned to live in every circumstance, not because circumstances no longer mattered, but because his center was anchored where circumstances could not shake it. I am anchoring you in the same way. Little by little, there will be days when you stumble, moments when you return to self-blame, comparison, and doubt. Do not panic. Covenant does not dissolve because of a misstep. You are not disqualified because you are still learning. I do not withdraw my hand when you falter. I hold more firmly, as I did with Peter when he began to sink in the waves. I did not ask why he was weak. I reached out, my hand, and my child. Every time you allow me to reach for you like this, you are learning to trust not in your own strength, but in my nearness. Then there will come a time when you look back and realize this: what has changed is not only what you have made it through, but who you have become. You no longer live to be affirmed, you live from being received. You no longer need noise to know your worth. You are no longer afraid of slow days. You are no longer anxious when waiting is required. And from that foundation, I will open things you could never open on your own, not for display, but for service, not to place you above others, but to help you stand firmly among them. You will see blessings arrive without making you proud, because you know they did not come from your own ability. You will see new responsibilities without fear, because you are no longer carrying them alone. You will step into new spaces without losing yourself, because covenant has been etched deeper than any position. And if one day you turn back to look at the place you once called a full stop, you will no longer see it as a wound. You will see it as a marker, the place where you stopped running, stopped striving, stopped pretending, and began to live truthfully in me. You will find that there are days when nothing remarkable seems to happen. No visible miracle, no dramatic turning point, no strong affirmation from the outside. Just an ordinary day filled with familiar tasks. But my child, do not despise such days. This is where the covenant is lived out, not merely proclaimed. Joshua did not conquer the promised land in a single battle. There were cities that fell with a shout, but there were also many days when he simply walked, allocated, stayed, and remained faithful to what I had spoken. Your path is the same. Not every day is Jericho, but every day requires presence. At times you will ask yourself if I am leading. Why do I still feel weak? Why do moments of doubt still rise in me, my child? Faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the refusal to let doubt lead. Even the disciples who saw the loaves multiplied, who witnessed the dead raised, trembled when the boat met the storm. Yet in that storm, I did not rebuke them for their emotions. I asked them something deeper. Why are you afraid? Not to shame them, but to draw them back to the center. I ask you the same, not to accuse, but to remind you that I am in the boat. Even when the waves are not yet calm, you will learn that abiding in the covenant does not always feel comfortable. There are days when the truth I shine will unsettle you, because it touches places you have grown accustomed to avoiding. There are habits I gently point out, not because they are clearly wrong, but because they are no longer necessary. Like someone who has carried a heavy load for too long. When it is finally set down, the emptiness can feel strange and unfamiliar. You may recognize that sensation. But hear this, that space is not meant to diminish you, but to make you freer. I am separating you from dependence on fluctuating emotions. I am teaching you to live by truth that is steadier than feeling. David wrote that even though he walked through the valley of the shadow of death, he feared no evil, not because the valley was harmless, but because I was with him. Presence does not remove the valley, it changes how you walk through it. And when you have walked through it with me enough times, you will no longer panic whenever darkness appears. You will recognize that darkness has no authority to define the path. Some relationships in your life will also be brought back into the light. Not everyone who once walked with you can continue at the new pace. This does not mean you abandon them, nor does it mean they are wrong. It simply means some people knew you in a version of yourself that was always striving, always bracing, always accommodating. When you begin to live from covenant rather than fear, certain connections will shift. That may grieve you, but I am with you in that grief. Even Jesus had people turn away when his words became hard to hear. Truth always filters what is real. You will learn to obey in very small things, not in decisions that shake the world, but in quiet choices, telling the truth when it would be easier to say otherwise, resting when it would be easier to push on, forgiving when your heart is not yet fully ready. This is where the covenant is strengthened, not on a stage, but in the hidden place, and I see it all. I do not miss a single choice you make, whether in the light or in silence. Then there will come a moment, very naturally, when you realize you are no longer obsessed with the question of when. You stop counting milestones. You stop matching pace, not because you no longer have dreams, but because dreams are no longer what you cling to in order to survive. You begin asking different questions. Am I walking rightly? Is my heart still tender? Am I walking with you? These questions keep you more alive than any schedule ever could. And as you live this way, you will be surprised many of the things you once waited for begin to come toward you without being chased. I do not promise you a journey without weariness, but I promise a journey no longer marked by loneliness. I do not promise that you will always understand why, but I promise that you will always know with whom you are walking. And that is the greatest difference. For when you know you are walking with me, even the unclear stretches will not cause you to lose your way. They will simply slow you down, deepen you, and make you more real. There will be days when you discover that this new steadiness is not as comfortable as you imagined. Without familiar chaos to drown out deeper questions, you begin to hear your inner voice more clearly. You realize you still want to return to the old rhythm, not because it was good, but because it was familiar. Familiar with rushing in order to feel valuable, familiar with tension as proof of being alive. And in that moment, you may mistake silence for emptiness, slowing down for regression. But I am there not to let you interpret alone, but to remind you not every quiet space is loss. Some quiet spaces are soil being turned. You will face a very subtle temptation doing the right thing in the wrong way. You know I am not calling you back to obvious old paths, but you will be invited to choose routes that sound good, reasonable, even responsible. You will think that if you push a little faster, compromise a little less visibly, strain just a little more, everything will soon be fine. My child, in those moments remember my son in the wilderness. When hungry, when weak, when the offer sounded perfectly reasonable, he did not choose the shortcut, not because he could not, but because he knew who he was. Covenant is kept not by avoiding all hardship, but by refusing to lose identity when hardship comes. I know you fear that if you do nothing more, you will be left behind. You fear others will pass you by. You fear opportunities will slip away. But I ask you one honest question. Do you want to arrive quickly? Or do you want to arrive rightly? There are places where arriving too early would break you. There are things received too soon that would become burdens. I have seen you carry responsibilities before their time, take on roles beyond your strength, and try to hold what you were never meant to carry. And I have seen how tired you became. I am not calling you back into that cycle. I am calling you to remain in my leading, even when that pace makes you feel slower than others. In daily life, this tension will show itself very concretely. When you receive an offer that sounds reasonable but weighs on your spirit, when you face a decision where choosing quickly brings praise, but waiting brings misunderstanding, when you feel the urge to say yes simply to avoid discomfort, even though you know you need to say no. These moments are not big or dramatic, but they are where covenant is tested, not to see whether I am faithful, but to see whether you trust that I am enough to keep you safe when you choose what is right. You will come to see that I no longer allow you to rely on emotional excitement to confirm direction. Before, you were used to stepping forward only when you felt strong, clear, and certain. Now, many times you will move in quietness without climax, without absolute certainty. This may unsettle you, because you were accustomed to using feeling as your compass. But I am giving you another compass, a deep peace that is not shaken by circumstances. Paul learned this when he said he could do all things through the one who strengthened him, not because everything went smoothly, but because he no longer allowed circumstances to define his strength. There will be times when you stumble over yourself. You react faster than you intend to. You speak a sentence and then wish you had remained silent. You turn back to self-reproach, thinking that if the covenant were real, you should have been different by now. But my child, the covenant does not turn you into someone who never fails. It turns you into someone who no longer hides when they do. I am not distant from you in the moment you lose your footing. I am nearer, like David, a man after my own heart, who still made choices that cost him dearly. What preserves the covenant is not a chain of successes, but a heart that returns without growing hardened. There is a very real tension in this season. You know you cannot live as you once did, yet you cannot fully see how you are meant to live next. You stand between two shores, and the current is strong. You may feel the urge to cling to whatever is familiar, but I tell you this, let the water carry away what is no longer necessary. I am not sweeping you away. I am carrying off the burdens you have borne for too long. And if you feel afraid when your grip loosens, remember this: I do not invite you to let go so that you will fall. I invite you to let go so that you may be upheld. You will learn that obedience in this season often does not come with a heroic feeling. It comes quietly. No one sees that you chose not to act, chose to wait, chose to keep your heart soft rather than to prove yourself. But I see it, and I count those choices as precious, because they show that you are trusting me more than your own ability to manage and control. This is where faith matures, not through applause, but through steadfastness. And then, amid those small inner conflicts, you will begin to notice a very subtle change. You are no longer pulled so strongly by the things that once unsettled you. Praise does not inflate you excessively. Criticism does not undo you. You begin to stand more firmly, not because you have grown harder, but because you have been placed on a firmer foundation. I am doing this work in you not to separate you from life, but to help you enter life without losing yourself. If at times you grow weary of having to choose rightly again and again, remember that you are not choosing alone. Each time you pause to ask me, each time you listen instead of reacting, Each time you accept a slower pace in order to guard your heart, I am there. I am not standing at a distance, observing. I walk with you in the very tension itself, until what once felt like conflict becomes a new instinct, and what once frightened you becomes the place where you realize I have been holding you. Even while you are still learning how to trust, there will be moments when you wonder why I do not make things clearer for you, why I do not firmly shut one door or fully open another so that you would not have to waver. But my child, there are things which, if I made them too clear, you would walk by the certainty of reason rather than by the reliance of faith. I do not only want you to go the right way, I want you to walk with me. And walking with me always requires listening, slowing down enough to discern my voice amid the very similar urgings of fear, ambition, and responsibility. You will come to see that many of the hardest decisions are not difficult because they are wrong, but because they are good in ways that do not come from me. They promise quick stability, immediate reassurance, visible approval. Yet each time you place your hand upon them, your spirit grows quietly heavy. I do not rebuke you for having chosen them before. I only ask what you have learned from that weight. For the peace I give is not the absence of risk, but my presence in the midst of risk. And when you learn to honor the subtle heaviness and lightness within your soul, you are learning to walk by my spirit, not by pressure. There are nights when you lie down and your mind refuses to rest. You think about what you should have done differently. The opportunities you fear have passed. The people you feel you have fallen behind. You turn from side to side, searching for a reason to reassure yourself. Yet the more you think, the more exhausted you become. And in those very nights, I am closer than you realize. I do not always speak in words. Sometimes I simply place my hand upon your heart and steady your breathing. I remind you that sleep itself is an act of faith, because when you sleep, you acknowledge that the world does not require you to remain awake in order to exist. You begin to learn a lesson that runs counter to habit. You do not need to understand everything in order to obey. Before, you were accustomed to understanding first and acting afterward. Now there are times when I invite you to do something very small, without revealing its full meaning, like Naaman, who desired healing yet stumbled because the way I chose was too simple. My child, not every miracle arrives with spectacle. Many miracles unfold when you are humble enough to do the small thing I ask, even when it does not align with how you believe things should happen. In everyday life, this may look as simple as choosing silence instead of argument, choosing rest instead of pushing further, choosing truth instead of convenience. These choices do not make you stand out, but they keep your soul intact, and I care for that wholeness more than any achievement. For if you lose yourself in order to gain something, you will have to use that very thing to keep yourself standing, and you will grow weary again. There will be relationships that test you in this season, when you no longer react as before, no longer rush to accommodate, no longer strain to please. Others may not understand. They may think you have changed, that you have grown distant. You may be tempted to return to your old role simply to preserve harmony. But I am there to ask you, do you want to preserve harmony or preserve truth? Not all peace comes from truth, but all truth ultimately leads to a deeper kind of peace. I am not asking you to cut others off coldly. I am inviting you to stand in the right place. When you stand rightly, what belongs with you will find a way to remain. What does not belong to the new rhythm will naturally fall away. This may be painful. Even Abraham had to leave his father's house in order to step into the promise. That leaving did not make him ungrateful, it made him obedient. And my child, Obedience sometimes takes the form of accepting not being understood right away. There will be times when you feel the urge to return and ask me, when will I see results? When will I be sure I am not going the wrong way? When will this covenant point open into what I hope for? I am not offended by these questions, but I invite you to change one word in them instead of asking, when. Ask, how am I standing? When you ask this, you will begin to see more clearly how I am adjusting your rhythm, how I am softening what has grown rigid, how I am reordering your priorities from within. And little by little, you will realize that I am not only leading you towards something ahead of you, I am leading you back to yourself, the person who no longer strains to survive, no longer has to prove themselves in order to be loved, no longer has to run in order to feel worthy. You begin to live from the inside out, not from the outside in. This is the sign that the covenant has taken root, not only in your thinking, but in the way you live each day. If there are times when this journey feels longer than you hoped, remember that I do not prolong it to test you without purpose. I extend it so you will not return to being enslaved by what you have already been freed from. I do not want you merely to escape. I want you to step into true freedom. And true freedom does not arrive in a single, explosive moment, but through hundreds of small, faithful, quiet choices, moments where you choose to trust me rather than your old fears. I am still here, unwearied by your questions. Not distant when you slow down, not disappointed when you are still learning. I walk with you through those very ordinary days, until you begin to see that what you thought was a pause was actually the path I was using to lead you deeper, steadier, and truer in the covenant I called you into. There will be a season when you become acutely aware that your weariness no longer comes from doing too much, but from holding two positions at once. One part of you has been touched by the covenant and has tasted a peace that does not need to prove itself, while another part has not yet fully trusted that such a life can be sustained. You find yourself wavering between two rhythms. The old one is familiar, the new one is right, and that tension is what exhausts you. I do not see this as failure. I see it as a sign that you are truly stepping out of what is old, not merely talking about it. You will discover that the hardest things to release are not what is clearly wrong, but what once helped you survive. The mechanisms you built during difficult years did protect you from breaking. I do not deny that. But what protected you in one season can become chains in another. When you remain on constant high alert, there is no room left for trust. When you continually prepare for the worst, you lose the capacity to receive the good I am opening for you. I do not rebuke you for learning how to survive. I am simply telling you that you are no longer in a season where survival is required. There will be times when I place before you choices that look very similar on the surface but differ deeply in spirit. Both are reasonable. Both can bring results. Yet only one preserves the life within you. You will recognize this not by argument, but by a deep, quiet knowing. One choice allows you to breathe more freely. Even if the path is longer, the other tightens you inside. Even if it promises speed. This is not emotional fluctuation. It is the discernment my spirit is forming in you. So you are no longer deceived by promises that sound right but do not come from me. In everyday life, this discernment will show itself in very ordinary moments. When you consider taking on another responsibility even though your body is already signaling fatigue. When you prepare to reply to a message and know that speaking truth will be difficult, but giving a quick answer will leave your heart heavy. When you stand before an invitation that makes you feel chosen, yet also asks you to step back into an old role. These moments have no spotlight, no audience. yet they are where the covenant is lived most honestly. You will find yourself remembering ancient stories, not to compare, but to understand where you are. Moses was called to free my people, but before that, he had to live 40 years in the wilderness without power, without title, without a voice. When I called him again, he no longer trusted his own ability. He trembled. He hesitated. Yet that was the man who could lead my people without turning power into pressure. I do not discard you when you lose confidence. I use that very uncertainty to teach you to depend on me rather than on yourself. You will also begin to understand that not every delay needs an explanation. There are questions which, if you force an answer too early, become excuses that mask fear. I do not want you to persuade yourself that everything is fine. I want you to be real. And sometimes the truth is simply this: I do not understand yet, but I am staying. That is not weak faith. It is mature faith, faith that does not require constant good feelings in order to keep walking. There will be days when you accomplish very little, yet your heart is calmer than on the days you once did so much. You may be surprised, even suspicious of yourself, wondering whether you are slowing down too much. But I am teaching you that productivity is not the measure of life. Even I rested after the work of creation, not because I was tired, but to establish a rhythm for life itself. If I am not ashamed of rest, you do not need to condemn yourself when you stop at the right time. You will come to realize something essential. The covenant point is not only where I meet you in weakness, but where I learn to trust you, to trust that you will not return to paths that drain you, to trust that you will choose truth even when it brings no immediate advantage, to trust that you will not use me to justify ambition, nor use ambition to fill the space meant for me. And when I trust you in this way, you will begin to trust yourself in a new way, not with pride, not with fear, but with steadiness. Then there will be moments of such deep quiet that you may fear nothing is happening at all. Yet I am doing more than you can see. I am rearranging the scattered pieces within you into a new order. What once pulled you in many directions now begins to gather around a single center. You are no longer torn by endless musts. You begin to live from a place of given to be in me, given to walk with me, given permission to fail without losing yourself. If you look back, you will see that the place you once called the end has not disappeared. It is still there, but it no longer carries its old meaning. It has become the place where you learn to stop without fear, to let go without falling, to wait without dying inside. And from that place, you will move forward not as one who barely escaped, but as one whose foundation has been reset. So even if the road ahead is long, you no longer need to ask whether you will stand. I was there before you. I am there with you now, and I will not leave you as you continue walking in the covenant I called you into. As you move on, I will begin to remind you of words I spoke long ago, not so you can memorize them, but so you can stand firm. Verses of scripture you once read as beautiful ideas will become places you lean on when your heart wavers. When you find yourself without strength to strive, the words will rise quietly, yet firmly. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. You will no longer hear this as distant comfort, but as a truth you are living out in your imperfect days. You will realize that I do not withdraw my promises when you slow down. I do not change my mind while you are still learning. As I spoke through the prophet, I know the plans I have for you, plans for peace and not for harm, to give you a future and a hope. Yet, my child, I do not hand you that future all at once. I lead you step by step, so hope does not become a burden. so the future does not press you down before you are strong enough to stand. At times, you may feel as though you are walking through a mist not dark enough to be despair, yet not bright enough to see far ahead. In those moments, remember that my word is a lamp to your feet and a light to your path. A lamp does not illuminate the entire long road. It gives just enough light for the next step. And that is all I ask of you, to take that step. No more. When you are faithful to the small light, I will not allow you to lose your way in the darkness. You will also learn that the peace I give is not like the peace the world gives. That peace does not depend on whether everything has been resolved, but on whom you are with. That is why I said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." It is not a peace that makes every question disappear, but a peace strong enough for you to carry your questions without collapsing. And when you live within that peace, you will no longer be driven to rush to conclusions about yourself. There will be days when you feel weaker than you hoped. On those days, I do not require you to appear strong. I invite you to come closer. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This rest is not an escape from life, but learning how to carry life in me. When you come, as you are, unedited, unhidden, I lift you in ways you could never lift yourself. You will begin to see my word fulfilled not through loud events, but through inner renewal. Before, you were easily shaken by what others said about you. Now, you remember that I called you my beloved child before you had done anything at all. Before, you feared the darkness because you thought you had to face it alone. Now, you remember that even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I am with you not to shorten the road, but so that you do not walk it alone. In the small choices of everyday life, you will find yourself returning to my word as a measure not to enforce rigid right and wrong, but to keep your heart soft. When you hesitate, you will remember that wisdom comes from me, and that I give it generously to those who ask. When you fear lack, you will remember that I am your shepherd, you shall not want. These words do not make you passive, but they keep you from running in the wrong direction. My child, Scripture is not a book for you to prove yourself right. It is the story I have been writing with humanity. And now I am continuing that story with you. Each time you choose to trust before you see, you are stepping into the same current of faith as those who walked before you, not so you become like them, but so you know that I am still who I am, the one who does not change. As you continue in this covenant, my word will no longer be only on your lips, but woven into the rhythm of your life. You will not need to quote much, because your life itself will begin to reflect what I have spoken. Others may not be able to name what they sense, but they will feel it, a steadiness not born of control, a peace not dependent on circumstances, a hope that does not rush. You will begin to realize that change is no longer confined to your inner world. It is gentle, quiet, so subtle that if you are not attentive, you might think nothing is happening. But I see it. I see how you are beginning to live differently in very ordinary ways. You no longer leap out of bed with the feeling that a new day is chasing you. You wake a fraction slower, not from laziness, but because you no longer begin your day with the fear of having to prove yourself. You breathe more deeply before picking up your phone. You allow a brief pause before entering the day's momentum. That pause is small, but it reveals that your center has shifted. You also begin to choose differently in your work. It is not that you do less, but that you no longer work from panic. There are tasks you once accepted immediately out of fear of missing out. Now you pause and ask me one simple question: does this preserve life in you? Sometimes the answer is no, even when it looks reasonable. You say no not with anger or defensiveness, but with a quiet certainty. You are surprised to find that the world does not collapse. Others may not understand, but your soul feels lighter. That is the first sign of freedom moving outward. I see that the way you speak is changing as well. Before, you spoke a lot to fill silence, to keep peace, to avoid being misunderstood. Now, you speak less, but more truthfully. There are conversations you no longer try to steer toward yourself. There are moments when you remain silent, not out of fear, but because you no longer need to speak in order to exist. You remember that words carry power, and you do not want to use yours to contradict what I am forming within you. You are living closer to what I have spoken. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no, not harsh, but clear. Even in your relationships, this movement begins to show. You no longer hold everything together at all costs. You are no longer terrified when a small distance appears as you live more honestly. You learn to love without controlling, to care without losing yourself. Some will slow their pace with you. Others will turn in a different direction. This does not unsettle you as it once did, because you know I do not build your life on clinging, but on genuine communion. Even Jesus did not keep the crowds by making his words easier to hear. He kept the covenant through truth. You will also notice that your body begins to respond to this new rhythm. You sleep more deeply on nights when you do not force yourself to resolve everything before rest. You eat more slowly, no longer just to refuel for the next task. You listen to small signals you once ignored. I do not separate your soul from your body. I work with both, for I have said that your body is a temple, and I do not build new life on a neglected foundation. There are mornings when you look at your schedule and no longer see it as a sentence passed upon you. You see it as a sequence of opportunities to live faithfully. Not every day feels exciting, but no day feels as empty as before. You begin to understand my word in a very practical way. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice in it. Not rejoicing because everything is easy, but because you no longer have to live that day apart from me. These outward changes are quiet. No one applauds. There is no grand affirmation. And precisely because of that, they are real, like a seed sprouting underground before anyone sees green above the soil. I do not urge you to display what I am doing. I guard it in hiddenness until it is strong enough to emerge. And you, too, learn to treasure what is hidden, without explanation, without proof. There will come moments when you look back at old reflexes and realize they no longer hold the same power. An unanswered email no longer sends you into panic. A criticism no longer breaks you. A delay is no longer automatically labeled failure. You remember what I have spoken. Be still, and know that I am God. You are not still out of helplessness, but because you know who is in control. My child, do not underestimate these small movements. They are proof that the covenant is no longer something that lives only in your thoughts, but has entered the rhythm of your life. I am not in a hurry to push you toward greater changes, while these quieter ones have not yet grown firm, for it is these unseen, repeated choices that are forming a new kind of person, one who can step into what is greater without losing life along the way. You are beginning to see that many of the fears that once governed you do not come from the present, but from memories that were never fully touched, times you were abandoned, compared, forced to grow up too soon. I do not rush to drag these things into the light through a dramatic event. I let them surface gradually in very ordinary moments when you find yourself reacting more strongly than necessary. When you shrink back at a simple reminder, When you feel the urge to prove yourself even though no one is asking. And in those moments, I am not standing at a distance. I am right there, inviting you to pause, so that you do not keep living from an old wound in a new season. You will learn to name what is happening within you, not to overanalyze it, but so you do not confuse it. You will begin to distinguish what is the leading of my spirit and what is merely the reflex of an old fear. You will notice that some impulses sound very reasonable, yet tighten you inside, while some invitations are very quiet yet open you up. I am training you in this discernment not to make you suspicious of everything, but to keep you from being naive with yourself. True love is always accompanied by clarity. There will be times when you feel sad without knowing exactly why. Not sad because of a new loss, but because old things are finally being allowed to leave. When my people left Egypt, they did not only depart from a place, they left behind an identity defined by chains, and that departure is always accompanied by grief, even when those chains caused pain. My child, do not condemn yourself when you find yourself missing an old rhythm. Remembering is not returning. Remembering simply means you are saying goodbye. In this season, I will teach you to love truth more than comfort. Some of what I speak to you will require adjustment, release, a change in how you have grown used to living. I do not speak to make you shrink. I speak to make you free. Jesus said that the truth would set you free, not because truth is always easy to hear, but because it cuts the invisible cords you have long carried. When you choose to remain with truth, even when it first makes you uncomfortable, you are stepping deeper into covenant. You will begin to see relationships brought into a new light, not so you can categorize others, but so you can discern rhythm. There are people who are good and close to you, yet connected to a version of you that was always striving. When you no longer live from fear, those connections will shift. That does not mean you must leave them behind, but you will no longer allow them to decide who you must be. I am not building your life on human approval, but on the identity I have placed within you. In your work and responsibilities, you will notice a similar shift. You will no longer ask only, "Will this take me further?" but, "Will this keep me whole?" And you will discover something very real when you choose wholeness. I do not leave you lacking. You may not move as fast as before, but you will endure longer. You may not see immediate results, but you will not be drained in the process. I have said that one who is faithful in little will be entrusted with much. Faithfulness is not doing more than your strength allows. It is moving in step with the rhythm I assign. There will be moments when you find yourself standing between two worlds, no longer belonging to the old rhythm, yet not fully seeing the shape of the new. You will be tempted to force yourself to become something definite, just to feel clear again. But I invite you to trust the process. Even a seed does not rush to show its shoot while it is still forming roots. If you pull it up to check, you will kill it. I am not hiding you to make you anxious. I am hiding you to protect the life that is growing. And as you remain long enough within this hiddenness, you will realize that you are no longer afraid of being forgotten. You no longer need to be seen in order to know you are on the right path, because you know that I see. You know that I am at work. You know that what I have begun in you, I will complete, not through pressure, but through daily faithfulness. This gives you a kind of freedom you have never known before, the freedom to live truthfully, even when no one fully understands your journey. There is something else you are beginning to notice. Even if you have not yet found words for it, you do not react as quickly as you once did. Not because you have become indifferent, but because you no longer allow every stimulus to strike the center of you. In the past, A small change was enough to unsettle your entire day. A shift in tone, an unreadable glance, a delayed plan, all of it pulled you into a defensive posture. Now you still notice these things, but they no longer propel you to fix, explain, or control everything immediately. This feels unfamiliar to you. At times you wonder why you are no longer as restless, why you do not feel the same urgency to react. You were used to believing that if you did not manage things quickly, they would spiral beyond control. Yet reality is showing you something different. Situations you did not intervene in early did not collapse. Relationships you did not strain to hold together did not fall apart. And this forces you to face a deeper question. Is it possible that you were carrying things that were never meant to be yours? This change does not appear only in major decisions, but in very small moments. When someone says something that unsettles you, you no longer rush to defend yourself. When a situation does not progress as you hoped, you no longer label it a failure right away. When you are misunderstood, you no longer treat being clarified as the highest priority. Not because you do not care about truth, but because you no longer use truth as a shield against the fear of losing your place. You are learning something you once thought impossible. Not everything needs to be fixed immediately in order for life to go on. This runs counter to the way you once survived. You believed that if you did not hold the rhythm, patch the gaps, compensate quickly enough, everything would fall apart. But the truth is that when you stopped holding on, some things stood on their own, and some things that could not stand revealed that they were never a foundation to begin with. This shift is beginning to touch how you understand value. In the past, your worth was tightly bound to being present at the right moment, responding correctly, maintaining your role in every situation. Now, as you no longer live from a defensive posture, you sense a distinct emptiness, not an emptiness of lack, but one created because the old voices have gone quiet. And that quiet space compels you to ask a deeper question. If you no longer have to prove yourself, then who are you? That question no longer unsettles you the way it once did. It does not demand an immediate answer. It simply stays long enough that you no longer run from it. And in that staying, you begin to sense a different kind of steadiness, one that does not come from what you can hold, but from being held, not from knowing everything, but from no longer needing to know everything in order to keep walking. You do not notice it at first, but this new quiet is already reshaping how you step into tomorrow. You no longer brace yourself for the worst before anything happens. You no longer live by the assumption that you will fall short if you are not constantly on guard. This does not make you naive. It makes you more real, because you stop living as someone who must always save themselves. And right here, a new tension emerges, not from circumstances, but from choice. For when fear no longer drives you, you are faced with a very honest question. What will you walk for now, with fear gone as a motivator? You cannot return to the old ways. Yet the new has not fully taken shape. You are standing in a space where the old motive has died, and the new one is not yet clear enough to name. This is not a pause. This is a threshold, and how you stand in this threshold will determine whether you enter the next season as someone free, or as someone carrying the old form of fear dressed in new clothing. You begin to do fewer things that once earned you praise, and more things no one sees. Not because you want to disappear, but because you no longer need the gaze of others to confirm that you are living rightly. There are evenings when you stop earlier than before, even though the list remains unfinished. There are invitations you decline not because they are bad, but because they would pull you out of the rhythm you have just learned. And in these choices, you no longer hear the familiar voice of self-accusation. Instead, you sense a quiet inner agreement, as though something deep within you has nodded in consent. This change reveals another layer of tension. When you stop running on fear, you must face the question of true desire. Before, you did much because you were afraid to stop. Now, without that fear, you must ask yourself where you actually want to go. That question is not easy, because it does not allow you to hide behind busyness. It requires you to take responsibility for your choices, not the heavy responsibility of pressure, but the responsibility of someone who knows they are living, not merely reacting. There are moments when you stand before an opportunity you would have seized without hesitation in the past. It promises wider influence, faster progress, a step closer to what you once dreamed of. This time, you do not rush. You realize that if you enter it with the old motive, you will lose yourself again, no matter how good the outcome appears. And in that pause, a word I once spoke becomes very clear. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? You do not hear it as a threat. You hear it as protection. You also begin to re-examine what you once called sacrifice. There were things you gave up not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that if you did not give, you would be left behind. There were times you yielded not because you wanted to, but because you were afraid to hold. Now, freed from that fear, you must relearn how to give. Giving not to purchase peace, but to reflect freedom. I have said that I delight in offerings given with joy, not with reluctance. And you are learning to discern the difference within your own life. This discernment reaches even into your prayers. You no longer come to me only asking for external change. You come asking to see more clearly what is happening within. Your prayers are shorter, less formal, but more true. Sometimes they are as simple as one sentence, "Keep me in the right place." And I hear that prayer not because it is eloquent, but because it comes from a heart that no longer wants to run ahead of me. You will notice that when your motives change, your pace of life changes as well. You are no longer driven by the question when, but by the question, with whom am I walking? This does not make you passive, it makes you awake. You begin to see clearly what needs to be done today, not to reach a grand milestone, but to remain faithful. And in that faithfulness, I do what I have promised, I add what you need. At the right time, not too much to make you proud, not too little to make you afraid. There are days when you feel slower than others. Comparison still visits, but it no longer stays. You remember that each person has their own path, and I do not lead two souls in the same way. Even Peter once turned to ask about John, and I did not give him a comparison. I simply said, "As for you, follow me." That answer still stands for you today. It cuts off comparison not by argument, but by focus. In this season, you will also notice small blessings appearing unassuming, but precisely placed. A conversation restored in truth, a task that moves forward just enough, a sense of calm that arrives without effort. These things do not overwhelm you, they make you grateful. And that gratitude does not come from having received much, but from recognizing that you are being led with care. You begin to understand that I do not need dramatic breakthroughs to prove that I am at work. I work steadily, layer upon layer, until what is external no longer contradicts what is internal. When you look back, you will see that this shift was not small. It was simply quiet, and that quietness protects you from confusing real growth with false progress. You are closer than you think to a new threshold, not one of achievement, but of readiness, when you are no longer driven by fear, and not yet carried away by glory. You begin to have the capacity to carry something greater without losing what is essential. This is where I want you to arrive. Not hurried, not showy, but steady enough that when the next door opens, you step through not to find yourself, but to give what I have placed within you. One very ordinary morning, you will realize that you no longer wake up needing to persuade yourself to get out of bed. There is no surge of excitement and no familiar pressure, just a quiet readiness. You rise not because you fear the day will pass if you do not begin, but because you know there is space for you in this day. The difference is subtle, but it changes the way you enter every hour that follows. In your work, you begin to clarify what truly requires you, and what only required you because you were once willing to carry it. There are tasks you used to hold tightly, convinced that if you let go everything would fall apart. Now you leave them where they belong. You are not abandoning responsibility, you are resetting boundaries. At first this feels unfamiliar, because you were used to defining your value by how much you could endure. But when you stop measuring yourself by endurance, you begin to see the quality of presence. 1 hour of focused, peaceful work carries farther than many hours spent in tension. These new choices are not always welcomed. Some people have known you in the role of the one who is always available. So, when you pause at the right moment, they feel unsettled. You do not need to offer long explanations. You do not need to justify yourself. You remain steady in your decision, not because you have become rigid, but because you no longer need agreement in order to exist. You remember words spoken long ago. Wisdom calls out at the city gates. It does not need to shout to prove itself right. When you live from that wisdom, you no longer have to win every conversation. In moments of quiet, you begin to hear more clearly what was once drowned out by noise. Not new words, but things you had always known, yet were not still enough to trust. You realize that faithfulness does not require you to do great things continually. It asks you to keep your heart upright in repeated choices, like the sower who goes out to sow, not seeing sprouts every day, yet sowing in the right season. And I do not forget the work of your hands, even when no one else takes notice. There are afternoons when you leave a meeting and no longer carry the heavy residue you once did. You do not replay every sentence you spoke. You do not return inwardly to correct yourself. You leave things where they belong. This once frightened you, because you were accustomed to believing that if you did not recontrol everything, you would fail. But reality is teaching you something different when you live truthfully. You do not need to go back and mend broken pieces, because they were not broken. Your body is also learning a new rhythm. You notice that fatigue no longer accumulates into exhaustion. You know when to stop before you are forced to stop. You hear the small signals and honor them, rather than labeling them as weakness. Even in Scripture, I taught that the wise listen to counsel. The body, too, is a form of counsel, not an enemy. When you care for it rightly, your soul has a place to rest. There will be times when you look back over the years you have lived and no longer see them as a series of mistakes to be corrected, but as a path that has led you here. Not every choice was right, but no choice was ever beyond my reach. This peace does not come from rewriting the past, but from the past no longer holding power over the present. You do not need to prove that you have learned enough. The way you live now is the answer. You begin to understand that the deepest obedience is not doing the hardest thing, but doing what is right when no one is watching. There are days when you choose honesty over convenience, moments when you choose to slow down instead of competing, times when you choose silence instead of self-defense. These choices do not place you on a stage, but they lay the foundation for what I am about to open. If the foundation is not secure, even an open door becomes dangerous. The outward movement is still gentle, but it now has direction. You are no longer circling, you are walking, even if the steps are not large. And in this very season, something becomes clear. You are no longer living in expectation of one great moment to rescue you from the present. You are living fully in the present. And from there, the great moments will come to you at the right time, not because you demand them, but because you are ready to carry them without losing what has been restored within you. There is something else you are beginning to see, which you were once too restless to face. You no longer need a dramatic event to believe that I am leading you. Before, you waited for a clear sign, a powerful shift, a wide open door to reassure yourself that you were not mistaken. Now you walk without gathering proof, not because you are reckless, but because you have learned to recognize my footprints in very small things. A right decision quietly kept, a word that does not need to be spoken, an afternoon that passes without your heart being pulled tight. These things draw little attention, yet they confirm direction more clearly than any loud promise. You also begin to see another truth. Not everything that is right needs to be defended. There were times when you spent great energy protecting the image of being right, preserving the story that you were not wrong. Now, as you no longer live from the fear of being misunderstood, you allow truth to stand on its own. If it is true, it does not need you to shield it. If it cannot stand, perhaps it was never a foundation. This letting go does not weaken you, it lightens you. And when you are light, you hear more clearly. There are afternoons when you sit down without the feeling that everything must be finished before you are allowed to rest. You stop midway, not because you have abandoned the task, but because you recognize that the rhythm of the day is complete. You leave the remainder for another day without condemning yourself. This once troubled you, because you believed that if you did not hold everything together, it would all slip away. But now, as you place things where they belong, you discover something different. What truly needs you will come to you at the right time. What depends only on your strain will fall away. In relationships, you no longer try to manage other people's emotions to preserve harmony. You speak more truthfully, without sharpness, without avoidance. At times this creates an uncomfortable silence, but you do not rush to fill it. You leave it there, long enough for truth to have space. You learn that true peace does not come from avoiding friction, but from not betraying what you know to be right. And within those silences, relationships with real foundations begin to deepen, while those sustained only by accommodation begin to loosen. You also notice a very subtle change in the way you pray. You no longer try to say enough. Say it correctly. Say it beautifully. There are days when you simply sit in stillness, without words, not because you are empty, but because you no longer need to fill the space. You allow me to speak through presence. You remember that even when I do not answer in the way you expect, I am still working in ways you cannot yet see. I have spoken that I know what you need before you ask. This quiet does not make you passive, it makes you trusting. There are times when you look back at the choices you declined and no longer feel the regret you once did. You do not ask what if as often, not because you have stopped dreaming, but because you no longer use dreams to escape the present. You understand that some doors, if opened at the wrong time, would require you to carry pressures you are not yet equipped to bear. And you also understand that I am not withholding good from you. I am protecting you from good that arrives too soon. In this new rhythm of life, you no longer measure your days by the number of tasks completed, but by the wholeness you have preserved. There are days when little happens, yet your heart is not empty. There are busy days when you do not lose yourself. This difference does not come from better management, but from having placed the center in the right place. When the center is right, everything else begins to arrange itself. You are beginning to see that what I am doing is not only preparing you for what is ahead, but also separating you from what cannot walk with you. There are habits, expectations, and attachments that once defined you, but can no longer keep pace with this new rhythm. This separation is not always gentle. It can make you grieve, because there were things you were once attached to, but you no longer confuse sadness with being on the wrong path. You let it pass through without clinging, without denying it. And it is precisely in this season that you begin to sense something very clearly. You are no longer standing at the edge, waiting to be rescued from the life you are living. You are being led to live that very life more fully. There is no need to change your surroundings, no need to change people, no need to change roles. Only the foundation needs to change. And once the foundation has shifted, every next step is no longer an effort to become someone, but a response to what I am opening little by little. Very real, very near. There is a truth you are beginning to face, one you used to avoid. You once measured whether I was with you by results. When things flowed, you felt secure. When things slowed, you doubted. Now, as your pace is no longer driven by outcomes, you are forced to look directly at what you once avoided, the reality that my presence does not increase when you succeed, nor diminish when you are confused. This does not weaken your desire to move forward. It frees you from panic when things have not yet changed. You are stepping into days where nothing remarkable seems to happen, yet nothing drains you either. You do your work, you keep small promises, you care for what is right in front of you, and in that ordinariness, a quiet steadiness is being formed. You no longer look for a sense of validation in every step. You are learning to walk without needing an echo behind you. This is the opposite of your old rhythm, where you needed quick feedback to know you were going the right way. Now you walk because you know whom you are walking with. This shift brings you face to face with a deep fear. If you are no longer driven by pressure, will you still move forward? You once believed that if you did not push yourself, you would stop. But what is unfolding is teaching you the opposite. When you stop forcing yourself, you do not stand still, you walk more steadily. You are no longer pulled off course by secondary goals. You are no longer scattered by invisible comparisons. You no longer need to manufacture motivation each day. Motivation now flows from inner alignment, not from fear of falling behind. In the decisions ahead, you will notice that you no longer choose what feels safest, but what feels truest. At times, what is true does not give immediate certainty, but it does not break you. It gives you a place to stand, even when the wind is still there. You will come to see that false safety often demands the sacrifice of inner life, while truth may make you tremble at first, but keeps you whole in the end. I do not lead you by outward certainty. I lead you by a depth of honesty that frees you from living divided. There will be moments when you are tested precisely in the areas where you have changed. You will encounter situations that once pulled you into old reactions, not to draw you back, but to show you that you are different now. You will realize that you are no longer drawn into the familiar game. You do not need to win. nor do you need to withdraw in bitterness. You stand in the middle, clear, undefended. And in that standing, you recognize this truth: what once controlled you no longer has power. You will also notice something very real as you slow down. You begin to see others more clearly, not to judge, but to understand. You realize that many of the pressures you once carried belong to others, passed on through expectation. When you no longer carry them, you do not become indifferent, you become rightly placed. And from that place, you love without being drained. You give without disappearing. There will be times when you wonder why I am not urging you forward more quickly, now that you are ready to let go of what is old. But I see what you do not yet see. Speed is not the measure of readiness. Depth is what keeps you standing when things begin to open. If I were to move you faster before you are deep enough, you would carry the old rhythm into the new season and call it progress. I do not do that. I slow you down so you can be steady, not so you will miss out. You are beginning to understand that the hardest thing is not losing what you once clung to, but living without needing to cling to anything in order to feel that you exist. Before, you always needed a clear anchor, a plan moving forward, a role you were holding, a confirmation on its way. When those things went quiet, you panicked because you no longer knew where you stood. Now, when the silence stretches on, you do not run to fill it. You stand in it uncomfortable, but not undone. There are days when you cannot say you are moving forward, but you also cannot say you are moving backward. This in-between state once frightened you, because it gave you no story to tell about yourself. But gradually, you realize that you do not need a new story in order to keep living truthfully. You only need not to betray what you already see clearly. And that is enough for today. You are also seeing more clearly how you once used the future to avoid the present. You would tell yourself, once this season passes, everything will be fine. Then the season would pass, and you would find another season to wait for. Now, with nothing left to promise yourself in some distant milestone, you are forced to live in very real hours. No coloring them, no rushing them, no postponing life with false hope. At first, this feels empty, because you were used to living off what's coming. But in that emptiness, you begin to be fully present in what is. Old habits come knocking again, not to pull you back, but to see whether they still have authority. You realize you can look at them without opening the door. You do not have to fight, and you do not have to run. You simply no longer belong to them. And that freedom does not come from sheer willpower, but from having stood long enough in the truth for them to lose their grip. You are also no longer in a hurry to name yourself with familiar labels. Before, you needed to know who you were in order to know what you should do. Now, you do what is right in front of you without attaching it to a grand identity. You no longer need to be the strong one, the faithful one, the responsible one. You only need to be someone whose words do not contradict the life they are living. This simplicity does not make you smaller. It makes you whole. In conversations, you begin to listen more than you speak, not because you have nothing to share, but because you no longer need words to secure your place. You discover that some things only surface when you stop trying to steer the conversation, and some connections can only stand when you stop carrying the rhythm for both sides. You allow others the space to be themselves, and in doing so, you finally give yourself permission not to strain. At times, you ask yourself if you no longer run on the old motivations. Are you missing out on something? That question does not disappear immediately, but it no longer redirects you. You look at it, recognize the fear beneath it, and refuse to let that fear take the wheel. You choose to remain with the truth of the present, even though it promises nothing yet, and that remaining is forging in you a kind of endurance you have never had before. You cannot name exactly what is happening, but you know you are no longer where you used to be. You no longer need to go back to fix the past, nor rush ahead to rescue the future. You are standing on a ground where each next step is no longer a reflex, but a response. And from this ground, when you move forward, you will not walk like someone trying to escape an ending, but like someone whose way of living has been reset, quiet, steady, and with no need to be loud in order to prove that the direction is right. There comes a moment when you realize that what is most uncomfortable is no longer uncertainty, but the fact that you cannot return to the old way without betraying yourself. You could try, but the moment you do, you feel your heart close, not because you are forbidden, but because you have seen too clearly to pretend you have not. This clarity does not make you proud, it makes you careful with yourself. You begin to sense the cost of each choice more clearly, not through dramatic consequences, but through subtle shifts in your inner breath. Some decisions appear harmless, yet cause your heart to tighten. Others receive no praise, yet allow you to breathe more deeply. You learn to trust that signal, not as a fleeting emotion, but as a sensitivity being sharpened. When you move against what you know to be true, you are not punished, you simply lose your peace, and you no longer wish to pay that price. In quiet hours, you begin to look directly at the stories you once told about yourself. You said you were someone who always had to strive, because without striving you would fall behind. You said you were someone who had to carry everything, because without carrying it, all would collapse. You said you had no right to stop, because stopping meant being forgotten. Those stories once helped you stand for a season. But now, as you look again, you see they were not the full truth. They were vows you made in fear, and you no longer live from those vows. This change does not come through one grand decision, but through many small moments when you do not do what you once did by habit. You do not take on more just to secure your position. You do not explain yourself just to be understood. You do not rush to fix things merely to avoid discomfort. Each time, you feel a new steadiness forming, as though you are learning to stand without leaning on a wall. At first, this feels exposing, but then you realize exposure is not the same as weakness. It simply means you are no longer wearing armor you do not need. Some relationships begin to move to a different rhythm. You no longer carry the expectation that the other person must fully understand you for you to be yourself. You no longer place the burden of staying the same as before on them. You allow the bond to change shape, not because you are letting go, but because you are honoring the truth of both sides. In that respect, what is real remains. What existed only through one-sided effort quietly fades. You do not need to close doors. You simply stop holding. In work and responsibility, you begin to clarify something you once avoided. You cannot live in place of every system. You cannot be the support for structures that refuse to stand. When you return yourself to the place that is truly yours, some things are revealed as weak, but that is not your fault. You stop confusing faithfulness with self-erasure. And as you stand in the right place, you find your strength no longer leaking into spaces that do not generate life. At times you look back on the recent stretch and see that it no longer resembles a climb uphill. It looks more like a reordering, where the things that once crowded your inner world are returned to their proper compartments. No noise, no rush, just a new order forming slow enough that you do not abandon yourself, clear enough that you do not lose your way. You do not need to name this season. You only need to live from it. Because from here, as you move forward, each step carries a different consequence. You are no longer trying to escape the life you are in. You begin to inhabit it fully. And precisely as you inhabit it, you will find doors opening not by force, but by fit. Not because you knock harder, but because you are standing in the right place, so that when the door opens, you step through without leaving yourself behind. You begin to recognize something that brings both calm and ache. Not every change is immediately visible, and not everything that is right is quickly affirmed. There are days when you walk honestly and uprightly, yet outwardly nothing responds. No praise, no confirming sign, no clear opening as you once imagined. And here a new tension emerges, not the old fear, but a quiet question if no one sees. Will you continue? That question does not come to test your endurance, but to reveal what you are truly living for. Before, you could go far as long as you were seen. Now, as attention thins, you are forced to face yourself. You see clearly that some steps you are taking no longer feel like progress. Yet if you were to turn back, you would know you had stepped away from the truth, and you choose to remain. Not because you are certain of reward, but because you are unwilling to trade integrity for familiar safety. In this space, misunderstandings arise that you did not expect. Some see your change and assume you have grown cold. Some think you have withdrawn out of weakness. Some no longer know where to place you because you no longer react as before. These things once would have driven you to explain, to prove that you had not given up. This time, you do not. Not because you disdain them, but because you know that if you must explain yourself in order to be trusted, you have already returned to the old place. You also come to see that this silence is not emptiness. It is like ground freshly turned, appearing barren on the surface. Yet beneath it, roots are taking hold more deeply than you realize. You no longer need to constantly locate yourself. You allow ordinary days to pass without labeling them success or failure. And in these unlabeled days, you begin to live more integrated, no longer torn between what you must become and who you are. There are moments when you find yourself facing a very small choice that carries unusual weight. Not a choice between right and wrong, but between staying in the right place and returning to the old way for the sake of ease. You see clearly that if you go back, you may move faster in the short term, but you also see just as clearly that the cost will no longer be fatigue, but an inner fracture, something it took you a long time to mend. And you choose slowness, not because you fear progress, but because you honor what is being built within you. My child, you are beginning to understand that in some seasons, what I am doing is not opening a road ahead, but closing the road behind, not with a wall, but with the truth you have already seen. Once you have seen, you cannot pretend you have not, and that very truth holds you in the right place. Even when what lies ahead has not yet taken shape, you are not stuck. You are being kept. In this rhythm of living, you no longer rush to force everything to make sense immediately. You allow meaning to emerge over time. Through repeated faithfulness, there are small things you do today that carry no special feeling, yet you know they are laying a different kind of foundation. Not a foundation for visibility, but one that will hold when the wind comes. You no longer treat ordinariness as a sign that I am not at work. You are beginning to understand that ordinariness, kept in the right rhythm, is a quiet miracle. And precisely as you remain within that quietness, another kind of preparation is taking place. not preparation for doing more, but for bearing more without being distorted, bearing slowness without bitterness, bearing not yet seeing without suspicion, bearing being misunderstood without bending yourself to fit. This kind of endurance does not harden you. It deepens you. You do not know exactly what will come next, and you no longer need to. What matters more is that you know you are no longer where you once were, and you are no longer moving by the old engine. When what is new opens, it will not need to pull you out of this life. It will meet you right here where you have learned to stand, to slow down, to be true. And then you will understand you did not take a detour. You were led through the only path wide enough for you to enter what is coming without losing yourself. There will come a time when you realize that the challenge is no longer whether you have enough faith, but whether you are willing to live by that faith when it brings no immediate advantage. There are days when you do what is right and lose an opportunity. There are moments when you hold to truth and lose convenience. And in those moments, you feel a very gentle yet very real pull, drawing you back toward the old way, where everything was faster, clearer, more easily recognized. But you do not go back. Not because you despise the old, but because you know you no longer belong to it. You are also beginning to see that I do not always explain why I keep you so long in a place that seems unchanged. Yet one thing is clear to you every time you choose not to compromise. A new layer of freedom opens. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to not be controlled by what you want. You no longer need to bend your conscience to keep a position. You no longer need to blur the truth to protect an image. You begin to walk more lightly, not because you are weaker, but because you are no longer carrying what was never yours to bear. There are evenings when you look back on the day and no longer feel the need to grade yourself. You do not ask whether you were good enough, how much you accomplished, how far you advanced. You ask only one simple thing: did I live in one piece today? That question does not tighten you. It awakens you. And in that wakefulness, you see that you are no longer divided between what you believe and what you do. The two are slowly meeting, not perfectly, but truthfully. You are also beginning to recognize that some invitations do not come from me. Even though they wear respectable names, they arrive skillfully, reasonably, at the right time. But when you look deeper, you see that they require you to return to self-promotion in order to be chosen. Before, you might have accepted, afraid that if you did not seize them, you would miss out. Now you see more clearly. What is meant for you does not require you to trade peace to keep it. And when you decline such invitations, you do not feel poorer. You feel more whole. Within that wholeness, you begin to learn how to wait without constriction. Waiting used to feel tense to you, tense with fear of being late, of losing out, of being passed over. Now waiting has a different shape. It is not standing still, it is taking small, well-placed steps while the rest is being arranged. You no longer use waiting to punish yourself. You use it to keep your heart soft. At times you wonder whether this quiet faithfulness truly leads anywhere. I do not answer you with words. I answer you with a very real change within you. You are no longer easily swayed by empty promises. You are no longer quick to trust shortcuts. You are no longer willing to trade depth for speed. These changes do not make you stand out, but they enable you to stand when the wind shifts. And I know that is what you will need when the next door opens. My child, there are things that can only be entrusted to one who has learned to stand firm before anything is given. Not because I am withholding, but because I love you enough not to place something weighty into hands that are not yet steady. You once thought this slowness was a sign that you were lacking. Now you are beginning to see it is a sign that I am working carefully, not loudly, not hurriedly, but precisely. And while you still cannot clearly see the shape of what is coming, you are being given a gift. You did not know you needed the ability to step into any season without losing yourself. When you have this, you will no longer fear whether a new season comes quickly or slowly. You will ask only one thing: where am I standing? And with whom am I walking? From there, every next step, small or large, will carry life. Not because circumstances are favorable, but because the ground beneath you has changed. You begin to feel this change most clearly not in quiet hours, but when you move among others. Before, you could blend into the shared rhythm without feeling torn. Now, as you no longer operate by the old engine, the difference in rhythm becomes unmistakable. You do not create it. It appears on its own, the way light reveals lines that were already there. And it is precisely then that the testing begins. Familiar situations suddenly feel difficult, not because the situations themselves are harder, but because the way you once handled them no longer fits. You no longer react quickly to smooth the atmosphere. You no longer nod along to preserve a false peace. You no longer run with the majority just to avoid being noticed. And that difference, subtle as it is, begins to be sensed. No one says it outright, but you feel it. Eyes linger a moment longer. Questions circle instead of landing. The silence after your words stretches just one beat more. You are not attacked openly, but you are placed in the in-between, no longer seen as the one who is always ready, yet not recognized as someone clearly moving in a new direction. You stand there without a clear label, and this is harder than you expected, because it offers no role to hide in. You cannot prove yourself right through results, because the results have not yet come. You cannot return to the old ways without breaking yourself. All you can do is stand in what you know to be true, and accept that others do not yet know where to place you. At times you are misunderstood, not because you are dishonest, but because you no longer explain yourself the way you used to. You let your words be enough, no more, no less. And when others fill the silence with their own assumptions, you do not rush to correct them. This once made you uneasy, because you were accustomed to living by being correctly understood. Now you are learning something harder: to live rightly, even when you are misunderstood. Without bitterness, without self-defense, without retreating into heavy silence. Simply standing. At work, you may be perceived as slower, less predictable, no longer as driven as before. Old criteria no longer fit you smoothly. Some think you have lost motivation. Some think you are avoiding responsibility. Some think you have changed direction but are afraid to say it. You hear it all not to argue, but to examine your own heart. If you sense yourself being pulled back by fear of losing position, you stop. If you feel the urge to prove yourself just to feel at ease, you stop. You do not stop because you are weak, but because you know that if you move from that motive, you will undermine the very foundation you are standing on. Public testing does not arrive with noise. It comes through the absence of affirmation. It comes when you do what is right and are not praised, when you hold to truth and are not chosen, when you refuse to compromise and are not immediately lifted up. And here, the deepest question is asked without words: what will you continue for? Not because you are seen, but because you have seen. There are days you come home with a strange kind of fatigue, not tired from doing too much, but from standing under scrutiny without wearing your old armor. You no longer mask yourself with pleasantness. You no longer hide behind busyness. You allow yourself to be fully present, and that draws on a different kind of energy. Yet within that weariness is a wholeness you have never known. You do not need to patch yourself up before sleeping. You do not need to justify to yourself that you did the right thing. You know, you will remember that others before you have stood in this same space. David was anointed, yet returned to the fields. No one treated him differently the next day. Joseph carried a dream, yet lived for years in places that did not reflect that dream at all. Even Jesus, before entering his public ministry, lived 30 years in obscurity, so that when his words were spoken, they did not need to shout. These stories are not told so you compare yourself, but so you know that what is happening to you is not strange. You are not invited to fight for a new image. You are invited to guard a transformed foundation. For if you try to make others understand too soon, you will be forced to use old tools to explain something new. And the new cannot survive those tools. It requires time to reveal itself, not through argument, but through consistency, day after day, choice after choice. There will be a very real moment when you realize that public pressure no longer causes you to shrink as it once did. It has not disappeared, but it no longer defines you. You no longer measure your worth by how others respond. You no longer adjust yourself to be convenient. You stand there not higher, not lower, simply in the right place. And from that place, you will see that public testing did not come to diminish you, but to confirm that what is within you is strong enough not to need concealment. From here on, you will not enter spaces the way you used to, not out of pride, but because you can no longer pretend. You carry a different weight, the weight of lived truth. It is not loud, but it causes everything around it to realign. And in that realignment, you will begin to see doors open not according to your timelines, not in familiar ways, but in deeper alignment between who you are becoming and what is waiting ahead. You will realize that testing no longer comes from what others say, but from what you choose to do when no one asks. There are moments when you could slip through unnoticed, situations where a small compromise would make everything smoother. No one checks, no one reminds you, but you know. And that knowing becomes your new boundary, not a rule imposed, but a line you do not want to cross because you have seen the cost of losing inner coherence. You will find yourself tested in things that seem very small: how you speak about others when they are not present, how you handle an unexpected advantage, how you respond when an opportunity opens that requires you to conceal part of the truth. Before, you might have reasoned quickly to justify moving forward. Now that reasoning no longer comes easily, not because you are restrained, but because you no longer want to use your mind to excuse what your heart has already refused, and you choose to remain whole, even if the cost is moving one step slower. There will be times when you are made to wait while others move ahead, not because you are lesser, but because you no longer use old methods to advance. This waiting does not feel like waiting before. It does not carry the scent of failure. It carries the scent of refinement. You notice a faint stir of envy, not intense, but enough to test whether you will return to comparison. You do not deny the feeling. You simply do not let it lead. You let it pass, and you hold your course. In such days, you learn to work without needing resonance. You complete what is entrusted to you without embellishment for effect. You do not use results to purchase reassurance. You allow outcomes to speak when their time comes. This lightens you in an unexpected way, because you are no longer carrying two loads, doing the work and monitoring how you are perceived. When you stop monitoring, energy returns to where it belongs. There will be people who begin to trust you without needing persuasion. Not many, not loudly, but enough for you to see that truth carries its own weight. They do not speak grandly. They simply place you in matters that require deep reliability. And there, you understand that real trust does not come from visibility, but from consistency, not consistency of performance, but of identity, not only in ease, but under testing. At times you will be asked directly about your change, not with accusation, but with curiosity. You no longer need to recount the entire journey. You speak only enough to avoid distortion. You do not shrink what you are living to fit others' expectations. You do not exaggerate it to gain approval. You allow truth to stand at its true size. And that simplicity guards you from two familiar temptations, showing off and hiding. In private moments, you will come to realize something profoundly different. You are no longer afraid of being exposed, because there is nothing left that you need to hide. Not because you are perfect, but because you are no longer living in two rhythms. What you do when others are watching and what you do when no one sees have grown closer than ever before. The distance between your public self and your private self is narrowing, and that narrowing brings a lightness you could never manufacture. You will understand that public testing does not end when others affirm you. It ends when you no longer need affirmation to keep your direction. At that point, the gaze of others no longer pulls you off course. Praise does not lift you above what is true. Criticism does not push you below what is steady. You stand in the middle, not in emotional indifference, but in the balance point of a life that has been recentered. When you look back at the stretch of road you have just walked, you will not see it marked by grand milestones or obvious victories. You will see it woven from countless small choices that no one applauded. Many moments when you kept your heart upright, though you could easily have taken shortcuts. Many times you remained silent, not out of fear, but because you no longer needed to prove yourself. And from these things, a truth slowly emerges, quiet but certain. What you once called an ending was never my stopping point. You once thought an ending had to be unmistakable in form, a door slammed shut, a final no beyond negotiation, a loss large enough to force a change in direction. But I led you by a different path. I allowed the old to fade slowly, slowly enough that you would not panic, yet deeply enough that you could not return without realizing you were betraying something within. And in that blurred space, you learned something you never learned when everything was clear, how to trust without a visible support. You are beginning to see that I am not in a hurry to pull you out of testing, because testing is not the enemy. What is more dangerous than testing is moving through your life without ever pausing to see who you are becoming. I do not want you to move quickly. I want you to move rightly. And right is not always measured by immediate outcomes. Often it is measured simply by whether you still hold continuity between what you believe and how you live. Even when no one else considers that important, you have begun to taste a different kind of peace. Not the peace that comes from everything being settled, but the peace that comes from no longer having to fight yourself just to survive. You no longer need to play the strong one when you are tired. You no longer need to wear borrowed confidence to cover fear. You are learning to bring both your weakness and your courage before me, without arranging them, without editing them. And I receive you as you are, not because you have done enough, but because you have returned to the right place. You may still not see what you are waiting for. The questions about the future may not yet have concrete answers, but you have received something you did not realize you needed this deeply, a way of living no longer dependent on gain or loss in each season. You can stand in lack without collapsing. You can stand in abundance without losing yourself. You can pass through my silence without rushing to conclude that I have left. For you have learned to recognize me not only by what I do, but by the fact that I am with you, my child. I do not promise that you will no longer be tested, but I speak truth to you. The tests ahead will not be like the ones behind. They will no longer aim to break you, but to reveal what truly governs you. When pressure comes, it will expose where your reliance lies, and you will be surprised to find that you are no longer pulled so easily as before. Not because you have grown harder, but because you have taken root more deeply. You will realize that I do not need you to loudly declare that you belong to me. Your life will say it on its own. In how you respond when you are misunderstood, in how you refuse what is unclean though no one would notice, in how you treat those who offer you no advantage. These things do not make headlines, but they are recorded very clearly in the hidden place. And I am the one who sees in that hidden place. There will be moments when you wonder whether this journey is worth it, especially when you look around and see others seemingly moving faster, receiving more, with greater ease. I do not fault you for those comparisons. You are still human, still living in this world. But I invite you to remember this: you were not called to run in someone else's race. You were called to walk the path I set before you, at a pace suited to your soul. What I am building in you is not something that can be rushed, my child. The covenant is not a moment you sign and then move on from. It is a relationship lived daily. It is expressed in mornings when you choose faithfulness without feeling inspired, in evenings when you choose forgiveness before feeling light, in decisions where you choose truth even when the cost is delay. And in those choices, you are speaking to me not with words, but with your life, that you trust me enough to stop trying to save yourself. I know there are days when you are still tired. I know there are times when you wish things were clearer, faster, easier. I do not count those wishes as a lack of faith. I only invite you not to let them lead you back onto paths I have already brought you out of. You do not need to become stronger. You only need to remain in what is true. I will do the rest. And then, when you least expect it, you will see new things begin to appear, not as rewards for enduring well, but as the natural outcome of a foundation that has been firmly set. The doors you step into will no longer alarm you, because you are not stepping from lack. The responsibilities you receive will no longer weigh you down, because you no longer use them to define yourself. You will find yourself walking in a freedom that feels unfamiliar, the freedom of not having to prove, not having to compare, not having to run. My child, what you once called an ending has finished its work. It has removed from you what could not walk with you. It has exposed the places where you once leaned incorrectly. It has brought you to the point where you have nothing left to present but the truth of who you are. And it is there that I met you, not to begin a completely new story detached from the past, but to continue that story upon a different foundation. So if today you pause and look around and still do not see things as you hoped, remember this: you are not standing in a meaningless void. You are standing on a foundation that has been reset, a foundation not built on your confidence, but on my faithfulness. From that foundation, you will move forward, not as one who barely escaped disaster, but as one who has learned how to live. And I will continue to walk with you, not only until you feel okay, but through every very real rhythm of life, where you no longer need to name everything, because your life itself has become the testimony that what once seemed like an ending has become the place where life was restored. You have walked far enough to realize that you are no longer who you once were, not because you have achieved something great, but because there are certain things you can no longer do. You can no longer return to unconscious hurry. You can no longer feel at ease deceiving yourself. You can no longer easily trade peace for a sense of control. These no longers do not impoverish you. They lighten you. And that lightness is not emptiness. It is a space made clean enough for new life to take root. You may still be standing in a very ordinary life, familiar roads, familiar responsibilities, familiar people you meet each day. Yet you know that something has changed. You no longer walk with the same force. You no longer carry the same fear. You no longer let the past whisper definitions over the future. You do not need to name this change for others. It is enough that you recognize it yourself. You are living from a different center. I do not need you to remember every word. I do not need you to return and reread in order to keep the fire. What I desire is that when you return to the rhythm of your life, you carry with you the stillness that has been placed within you, so that when a day feels heavier than usual, you do not panic, so that when an unclear choice appears, you do not rush, so that when you feel the urge to run faster than the pace of your soul, you know how to stop without condemning yourself. My child, I do not measure this journey by speed. I measure it by truthfulness. I do not ask how far you have gone. I ask whether you are still living whole. I do not look at how much you have accumulated. I look at whether your heart remains open before me. And I rejoice to see you learning to come to me, not to ask for more strength, but simply to remain in my presence. There will be days when you forget. You forget this feeling. You forget this clarity. You forget that you no longer need to prove yourself. I do not blame you. You are not disqualified by those days of forgetting. I simply wait for you to return, not with a great effort, but with something very small, a moment of honesty, a quiet sigh, an unpolished prayer, a decision not to return to the old path. That is enough for me to meet you again. You do not need to fear the future, not because I promise it will be easy, but because I promise I will not leave you. I am not ahead of you as a pressure you must chase. I am not behind you as an accusation. I am with you. In each very real step, when you are strong, I do not leave. When you are weak, I do not withdraw. When you understand, I am not proud. When you do not understand, I am not silent in a way that abandons you. I am there close enough so you do not lose your way, far enough so you are free to walk. You will not always know what comes next, but you will know that you are no longer alone as you step into the unknown. And that is what makes the greatest difference. Because when you are no longer alone, darkness no longer has the authority to name you. Uncertainty no longer makes you panic. Waiting is no longer a punishment. It becomes a space where I continue my work quietly, precisely, without haste. I do not promise that every unfinished story will be resolved in the way you hope, but I promise that nothing you have walked through has been meaningless. Every stretch of road, every choice, every fall and rising again is being woven into a picture larger than what you can see now. And when the time comes for you to look back, you will not only see what you have passed through, you will see who you have become. My child, carry this with you as you leave these words. You do not need to become different in order to be loved by me. You only need to remain in what is being renewed within you. Do not force yourself to be brighter, stronger, or clearer. Give the truth within you enough time to take root. Allow small changes to grow without being rushed. Let me continue to do the work you cannot see. And as you step back out into the very real life with all its noise, demands, and temptations to return to old rhythms, remember just one thing: you are not walking alone. Not because you always feel me, but because I have chosen to bind myself to you beyond all feeling. That does not change with good days or bad days. It stands firmer than your emotions. If one day in the future you find yourself standing at another threshold confused, unsure of where you are, remember this: you have been here before, and you were not abandoned. You were led through. This time will be the same, not because you are better, but because I am still who I am, not because you understand more, but because I do not change. When you were uncertain, I was already holding the direction. When you hesitated, I was already there. You only need to take one small step in trust, and I will meet you in that very step. Keep walking. My child, no need to rush. No need to strain. No need to look back and ask whether you are worthy. You were in my hands before you ever found words for this journey, and I will remain there in every ordinary, very real step until the story you are living becomes its own testimony. Without noise, that what once seemed like an ending has opened into a life deeper, steadier, and truer than you ever imagined. Thank you for listening to today's message. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so we can continue receiving the living word together, building a firm faith and walking in the boundless love of God. Amen.